On a tense Friday night at Danny's Tavern, the kind of place where off-duty cops drank hard and acted harder, the air shifted the moment Daniel and David Thompson walked in, twin brothers with a quiet confidence that unsettled anyone who paid close attention. The bar lights flickered low, country music hummed in the background, and conversations dimmed into cautious whispers as Officer Brett Coleman and his two companions zeroed in on the twins, table like predators choosing prey. Brett leaned forward, reeking of whiskey and arrogance, declaring the bar their turf, a place where people like you didn't belong. What he didn't know was that the two men sitting calmly before him were not ordinary civilians. They were men forged in war, sharpened in darkness, trained to survive under circumstances far harsher than the petty prejudice now circling them. Daniel observed every movement, every exposed weakness, every reckless gesture. David analyzed the room, from the security cameras to the exit routes to the worried expression of the bar owner watching silently from behind the counter. Their stillness wasn't submission, it was calculation. Years of being underestimated had taught them that silence could be a weapon, and patience a shield. As Brett slammed his palm on the table and ordered them to leave, the twins exchanged a half-second glance, an entire tactical conversation in one blink. They rose, controlled and deliberate, knowing exactly how this confrontation would escalate once they reached the parking lot. What none of the officers understood was that the men they were provoking were not frightened. They were waiting. And as the twins stepped toward the door with precision that made Rick Torres uneasy and Jake Morrison reckless, the atmosphere thickened into something volatile. The next 15 minutes would not just expose who truly held power in that moment. They would trigger a chain reaction that would ripple far beyond the bar, far beyond the officers' careers, and far beyond the night. Because arrogance was about to collide with trained discipline, and the impact would be catastrophic. The parking lot outside Danny's Tavern was dimly lit and mostly empty, the kind of space where threats grew louder, tempers hotter, and consequences sharper under flickering street lamps. Brett shoved Daniel against a car hood, his aggression fueled by intoxication and years of unchecked authority. Jake circled David shakily, confident that fear would freeze the twins into compliance. But the brothers' expressions did not shift. Daniel's mind flickered to Fallujah, 3 insurgents, 3 seconds, a decision that meant life or death. David recalled Kandahar, the controlled breath before breaching a door. They had faced war zones where shadows carried rifles and silence concealed explosives. This parking lot, with 3 sloppy, overconfident officers, barely registered as danger. Still, they waited. They let the officers push, taunt, and throw false accusations, because every second recorded on camera was another thread in the noose these men were tying for themselves. Jake's baton shook in his hand as he threatened to search them. Rick's instinct screamed retreat. Brett grew more reckless, enjoying the illusion of dominance. And through it all, Daniel spoke with the steady authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, not because he demanded respect, but because he had earned it in places where hesitation meant casualties. When Brett dug through Daniel's pockets, tossing his phone and wallet onto the ground, he had no idea he was provoking a decorated Army Ranger captain. When Jake shoved David, he didn't know he was pushing a Navy SEAL commander who had survived missions classified far above his pay grade. Their calm wasn't defiance, it was warning. As the officers escalated, yanked, searched, and insulted, the twins continued assessing angles, distance, timing, and escape routes, not for themselves, but for how the inevitable consequences would unfold. The officers thought they were cornering two defenseless targets. They never imagined they were triggering an explosive truth that would expose corruption, destroy careers, ignite national outrage, and pull apart a department built on intimidation. The storm was gathering, and the brothers could feel it, patiently waiting for the breaking point. The breaking point arrived the moment Jake Morrison, too drunk to think and too arrogant to retreat, pulled out his baton with the swagger of a man who believed his badge made him untouchable. Brett smirked beside him, convinced he finally had the leverage he needed. But what he failed to notice was the sudden shift in Daniel's posture, the subtle tightening in David's stance, and the way both men's eyes sharpened with military precision. The baton swung toward David, but the commander barely moved, just a controlled tilt of the head, a 2-centimeter adjustment that allowed the weapon to slice through empty air. Jake stumbled forward, nearly falling, his momentum used against him with effortless efficiency. There was nothing theatrical about the move. It was surgical, instinctive, the reaction of someone trained to neutralize danger with minimal motion. Daniel pulled out his phone, documenting everything with calm narration, turning this escalating encounter into evidence. Brett lunged to take the device, but Daniel had already repositioned himself with practiced ease. Every second was recorded. Every word captured. Lewis, the bar owner, appeared at the back door, filming from another angle, his courage finally overcoming his fear of retaliation. In that charged moment, a new force entered the scene, Assistant District Attorney Lisa Monroe, stepping out of a parked car with authority sharp enough to cut through the officer's bravado. Her calm dismantling of Brett's fabricated narrative crushed the last illusion of control. When she greeted the twins by rank, Commander Thompson and Captain Thompson, the police officers' faces drained of color. Reality hit them like a blow. They had threatened, assaulted, and attempted to arrest 2 decorated military officers on camera with witnesses while drunk. It wasn't just misconduct, it was career suicide. Rick collapsed onto the curb, understanding the fallout. Jake trembled. Brett's bravado cracked into panic. Yet even then, the twins didn't gloat. They didn't shout. They didn't need to. Their silence was judgment enough. And as Ada Monroe tallied their crimes, the officers realized that the men they tried to humiliate had just become the catalyst for the collapse of everything they had built on intimidation. A single moment of arrogance had opened the door to a reckoning none of them could escape. The arrival of the sheriff's patrol car sealed their fate. Officers stepped out with a clarity of purpose absent from Brett's intoxicated ego, recognizing immediately that the situation had spiraled far beyond a simple dispute. Monroe laid out charges with methodical precision. Harassment, attempted assault, abuse of authority, illegal search, intimidation, and conduct unbecoming of public officials. The officers' protests fell apart under the weight of 4 simultaneous video angles, audio recordings from the twins' military-grade watches, and multiple eyewitness statements. As Brett, Jake, and Rick were handcuffed, the irony burning hotter than the streetlights, panic settled over them like a suffocating fog. Their phones vibrated with notifications. The video had already gone viral. In 3 hours, millions had watched their brutality. Comments flooded social media. Other victims stepped forward. The department's phone lines collapsed under public outrage. Brett's ego shattered under the realization that he hadn't just assaulted 2 men, he had ignited a national outcry. His career, once buoyed by intimidation, was collapsing in real time. Rick's wife had already filed for divorce after watching the footage. Jake sobbed openly, begging for leniency he had never shown to others. But the tide had turned. They were no longer feared officers. They were public examples of corruption exposed. Meanwhile, Daniel and David stood quietly beside Ada Monroe, not triumphant but resolute. They hadn't planned this. They hadn't sought revenge. They had only refused to be victimized again. Their calm refusal to submit, their strategic patience, their refusal to use violence despite overwhelming skill, those choices made the story even more powerful. By morning, national news outlets broadcast the footage. By afternoon, the mayor announced a sweeping internal investigation. By evening, the department's leadership was under federal review. And as the officers were taken away, Brett looked at the twins one last time, demanding to know how they orchestrated his downfall. Daniel's response cut quietly through the night. "We didn't orchestrate anything. You destroyed yourself." The truth was simple. Power built on intimidation collapses the moment it is confronted by individuals who refuse to bow. The ripple effects of that night had only begun. In the weeks following the incident, the consequences spiraled far beyond what any of the officers imagined. 17 victims came forward, each recounting similar experiences of harassment, threats, and fabricated charges. Investigators uncovered a disturbing pattern. Brett's unit had operated like a small gang, using their badges as shields for misconduct. Departments across the state scrutinized older cases, leading to overturned convictions, internal disciplinary actions, and a complete restructuring of Danny's precinct. The town's mayor held emergency meetings. Federal oversight committees demanded transparency. Advocacy organizations launched community initiatives. And at the center of the storm were two men who had simply wanted a quiet night at a bar. Daniel and David returned to their hotel with dozens of calls from Pentagon officials, military ethics coordinators, and law enforcement consultants. Each call emphasized the same message. The country needed leaders who could bridge the widening gap between civilians and authority. The brothers, both modest by nature, agreed only because they understood that change didn't happen by accident. It happened when people stood up and stood firm against injustice. Media outlets praised their restraint, emphasizing how easily the confrontation could have turned violent had they chosen to react with even a fraction of their training. Instead, they used accountability as their weapon. Meanwhile, Lewis, the bar owner whose quick thinking made the incident undeniable, became a local hero. His willingness to record officers he feared for years sparked discussions across the nation about bystander responsibility. His bar, once overshadowed by the quiet dread of police patrons abusing power, now stood as a symbol of resistance and courage. And Ada Monroe's fearless pursuit of justice propelled her into the spotlight, her reputation skyrocketing as a champion of integrity. But beneath the national attention, the brothers remained grounded. They saw the bigger picture, a broken system relying on silence to survive. And they understood that their role wasn't to revel in victory. It was to push that system toward change. With every news segment, phone call, and community forum, one truth cemented itself deeper into the public consciousness. Arrogance collapses under scrutiny, and bullies fall when the people they target refuse to shrink. Months later, the ripple effects transformed the entire city. Brett was stripped of all authority and sentenced to probation after facing 23 criminal charges, his badge, pension, and life savings gone. Jake, once swaggering with alcohol-induced bravado, now worked a low-pay call center job, apologizing for breathing too loudly each time he spoke to customers. Rick, weighed down by guilt, accepted a quiet security job in a supermarket, avoiding eye contact with anyone in uniform. Their downfall unspooled slowly and painfully, each month revealing the cost of years spent abusing power. Meanwhile, the city underwent its most significant police reform in decades. 17 officers were removed from duty. 43 cases were reopened. 8 wrongfully accused individuals received both compensation and public apologies. Community training programs reshaped how officers approached racial bias and conflict de-escalation. At the helm of several of these initiatives stood Major Daniel Thompson, newly promoted for his leadership, calm under pressure, and unwavering integrity. He traveled across the country conducting ethics training sessions for police departments, emphasizing that respect is not commanded through intimidation, but earned through accountability. David, equally recognized, accepted a role in military-civilian relations at the Pentagon. His insights on conflict, perception, and controlled response made him invaluable. Media outlets named him one of the most influential voices in national justice reform. Lewis expanded his bar to 3 locations, each featuring a small plaque near the entrance. Silence protects abusers. Courage protects communities. His initiative to train bartenders in documentation protocols became a model replicated in dozens of cities. Ada Lisa Monroe shattered historical barriers when she was elected Chief District Attorney with an overwhelming majority. Her victory speech dedicating her win to those who stand tall even when the world tries to push them down. Through all this change, the twins remained symbols not of violence but of restraint, proof that strength is defined not by physical power but by principled action. In a world desperate for accountability, they had become quiet giants, reshaping systems without seeking glory. 6 months after the incident, life had shifted dramatically for the officers and the community, but the deeper lesson resonated far beyond the city limits. Brett, once an officer feared by many, now delivered coffee in a roadside diner, his shoulders slouched under the weight of irreversible consequences. Each time a customer recognized him from the viral footage, shame tightened around him. Jake's insurance job left him drained, guilt etched into his voice as he repeated the same scripted lines to strangers who had no idea he once cracked jokes about ruining lives. Rick worked security nights alone, unable to face his reflection because it reminded him of everything he allowed to happen. Meanwhile, justice continued reinforcing its message. 8 exonerated victims rebuilt their lives. Community patrol programs expanded. The mayor publicly credited the Thompson brothers for initiating the city's transformation. National publications covered the extraordinary reversal of power, how 2 unassuming men, targets of prejudice, became the catalysts for systemic reform. Daniel and David remained humble about the impact. To them, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about victory. It was about dignity. They had seen war zones where humanity crumbled, where fear dictated survival, where leadership meant owning the consequences of your decisions. They recognized that corruption, whether in combat or a small-town police unit, thrived on silence. Breaking that silence took courage, and they had carried that courage long before Brett Coleman decided they didn't belong in a bar. Their story inspired millions. Social media platforms erupted with conversations about racial bias, authority, and moral courage. Schools used the incident as a teaching tool about integrity. Law enforcement academies referenced the twins' restraint as an example of disciplined response. When asked why they didn't fight back with force, Daniel's answer always remained the same. Because real strength isn't proven with fists, it's proven with the choices you make when you're tested. Their legacy grew not because they acted violently, but because they refused to be diminished. They chose dignity when provoked, patience when insulted, and justice when wronged. And in doing so, they reshaped the nation's understanding of what it truly means to stand your ground. On the final day of Brett's probation, he sat in the diner break room watching a television interview featuring Major Daniel Thompson. The Major spoke with steady sincerity about reform, empathy, and responsibility, emphasizing that hate does not define who we are, it reveals who we choose not to be. Brett turned off the TV, overwhelmed by the cruel irony. He had possessed authority, privilege, and opportunity, yet squandered it all by choosing arrogance over integrity. The twins, whom he once dismissed as outsiders, had not only risen above his prejudice but also helped rebuild an entire system he corrupted. Justice had no color. Justice had no favoritism. Justice had consequences. While Brett's world shrank into regret, the Thompson brothers expanded theirs with purpose. Daniel lectured in packed auditoriums about ethical policing, his words shaping the next generation of officers. David's Pentagon role influenced national policies, his expertise redefining civilian-military cooperation. Lewis, bars served as community safe havens, each location busier than the last. Ada Monroe, now Chief District Attorney, spearheaded statewide initiatives on accountability and civil rights. Their impacts intertwined, proving that one night of injustice could catalyze a movement when confronted with courage instead of fear. The brothers' story spread across the country, inspiring millions to stand firm against discrimination and abuse. Their example showed that the greatest retaliation wasn't violence, it was success. Not destruction, it was reform. Not revenge, it was raising standards so high that those who once held power could never reach them again. In the end, the twins didn't just win a confrontation, they won a legacy. They proved that competence outshines arrogance, character crushes prejudice, and justice belongs not to those who wield power recklessly, but to those who stand unwavering when that power is abused. And for every listener hearing their story, one truth remained undeniable. When dignity meets opportunity, even the powerful learn humility the hard way. If you want more stories that reveal the strength hidden inside ordinary people and expose the truth behind courage, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because the next story may just change the way you see the world.